Hello, my name is Eve McIntyre. I'm a CBT psychotherapist, CBT supervisor and EMDR practitioner. In my brief video for today, I'm going to be focusing on EMDR, who this can help, how the therapy works, and also what you can expect if this is something that you're interested in. So if we start by thinking about who could benefit from EMDR, EMDR is a nice recommended evidence-based approach for PTSD. However, it is also useful if you are experiencing depression and anxiety. EMDR is particularly useful if you have had any experiences of traumatic events. And what we mean by a traumatic event within EMDR world is quite broad. And it's less about the severity of that event or how that might be quantified, to more about kind of the way that that has impacted. So trauma expert Van der Kolk refers to trauma as any experience that has left an imprint on you in some sort of way. So I guess kind of what we're trying to say here is it's more about kind of the meaning that that has had, and has that led into the development of any sort of maladaptive beliefs about the self, others, or the world that you're in. So if you are someone that has had any adverse experiences, regardless of how small you might think it is, if that has impacted on the way that you're thinking or on your mood or even physiological arousal, EMDR is likely to be very useful for you. I'm now going to talk a little bit about how EMDR works. So the way that EMDR works is not fully conclusive, unfortunately. What is theorised is that it very much rests on a neurological level. So it's linked to sort of changes in neural networks in the brain that bring about change and adaptive belief systems and support information processing that takes place. So at the core of EMDR is an adaptive information processing model. So I'm going to just explain a little bit about this and what this means. If we were to take an ordinary sort of experience, for example, so say if I was to go for a walk in my local area, this would feel that I would sort of be naturally processing information and storing that away. That memory is likely to become inactive because that information becomes filed away in the memory store. And say if I might need to recall on it at a later stage, I'm able to then purposefully sort of bring that to mind and maybe recall that information. There is, however, a difference with an ordinary experience, like just going out for a walk, just like how I might do normally, versus, say, when something adverse happens. So say if I was to go out for that walk locally and maybe someone threatened me, or if I was to witness something that was quite disturbing and unsettling, that information is processed differently. So what we sort of believe can sort of happen here is that the experience will be filtered through with an image. There'll be a belief that sits with it, an emotional reaction, and also a bodily sensation. But unlike maybe the memory that happens with an ordinary experience, this does not get filed away in the same way. And it's not adaptively processed, and that in turn is what can impact and have more of a lasting impact on maybe our mood and our thought patterns, and also what we're feeling physically, because that memory has not been filed away like other ordinary experiences are. And that's because of maybe the threat that's linked to it and the way that that experience has been sort of interpreted and the meaning that got placed behind it. So EMDR aims to support the brain with this adaptive information processing. And it does this not just on sort of a cognitive level in terms of what we can cognitively or logically maybe understand about something, but also on an emotive level and a physical one as well. And it does this through a mechanism called bilateral stimulation. And this is done in a way that sort of activates three key areas in the brain, which is our thinking brain, our feeling brain, and also the sensing brain. Bilateral stimulation is done through either following eye movements from side to side, if you'd sort of follow my fingers from left to right. It can also be done through tapping as well. What this does is it's aimed to mirror that very natural process that happens every night when we're sleeping. And that's when we have our rapid eye movement sleep. So you may have noticed this, where maybe if you have a child or your partner, the eye movements move very quickly when we're dreaming. And that is what it's trying to mirror. It's a very natural process, one that we would normally sort of engage in to support this information processing. And it's probably worth noting at this stage, it's then very different to hypnosis. They're not the same thing. The bilateral stimulation is meant to mirror a very natural kind of mechanism that links with when we dream. Finally, just a little bit about what you can expect from EMDR. So EMDR uses what we call a three-prong approach. It acknowledges our past, present, and our future. So the role of EMDR is not to really dwell on kind of past events that have happened, but it's trying to acknowledge that who we are in the present is often shaped by our past. And because of that, there is that curiosity and that sort of wanting maybe to understand those past events that have happened that have then shaped or contributed to who you are in the present. And that's why it's sort of quite important to consider those aspects and how that can also link in with the nature of EMDR therapy as well. So unlike traditional talking therapies, EMDR won't require you to talk in great depth and detail about what has happened. And for some, this can be quite a relief in terms of actually, if you have lived through something that's particularly sort of adverse or harrowing, the idea of going back over this and talking through it time and time again can feel quite sort of overwhelming in itself. And it may even put people off reaching out for support because of that aspect of it. So EMDR won't require you to talk in depth and detail about it. It will need you to sort of tune into those experiences in order to activate that memory network so we can support you with processing through that information. But it often feels, in terms of feedback that I've had, a lot, I guess, kinder compared to actually when it's a very intense talking or discussion about an experience that's been adverse or traumatic for you. So EMDR is characterised by different phases. So typically you would start off with an assessment session, then there'll be some formulation that you would do with your therapist, and then you'd start to move into what we call our sort of resourcing or sort of preparation phase. Resourcing is linked to sort of relaxation, relational resourcing. It's also linked to emotional regulation, grounding, and it's really aimed to support also if there's any sort of dissociation that's being experienced. And this phase is particularly useful because I guess kind of what this does is it lays a much needed foundation before we then move into the reprocessing phase, which is when we start to use the bilateral stimulation and process through traumatic experiences that are having an impact on you. So EMDR means all of those phases, from assessment through to the reprocessing phases, each of them equally important. So in terms of what you can expect, it won't necessarily be that you have one session and then directly move straight into reprocessing the memory work. There's often much needed work that's done in the build up to that, which really aids, supports and enhances that memory processing phase. So in terms of kind of the only other thing just to sort of think about is that with EMDR, it's also not a linear sort of approach. So you might find that there's some phases where you can sort of work through to memory reprocessing, then you might return to a bit of resourcing. It can also really nicely be used with other therapies as well, such as CBT. So I guess kind of in terms of what you can expect from it, it's not this sort of linear robotic sort of therapy. It will go at your pace. There'll be various phases to it, but it will very much be sort of done in your sort of pace and in a way that's actually meant to be really useful for you, which you and your therapist would work together on to work out. EMDR is a very efficient approach. It isn't always necessarily a quick or short-term therapy. I think sort of maybe similar to other therapies that are there, the duration or the sessions that are needed very much depends on the individual. So I guess this is just really appreciating that difference with if you're coming forward for EMDR therapy and there's maybe one adverse experience that happened as a one-off, your therapy that you need may be briefer compared to if there's been many adverse or traumatic experiences that you're wanting to have some support with, or just appreciating the fact that some of us, we don't all hold the same resources as one another, and that's okay. So some time might be more needed in resourcing before moving on to reprocessing. So it's really down to you as an individual, but it's just to really manage those expectations. It is an efficient therapy. it can be really, really useful, but it isn't always necessarily going to be that quick, short-term fix or therapy. So it's just sort of really holding that in mind. So in terms of kind of just to sort of finish off, so I'm an EMDR practitioner, as I mentioned at the start. I completed my EMDR training earlier in the year. I am currently receiving regular supervision from an EMDR consultant as I work towards accreditation over the next couple of years. I've been really amazed at how effective EMDR is, and also struck by the feedback that I've received so far as well. So if you are interested in EMDR or might be interested in sort of doing some work together, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I have included my contact details on a slide at the end of this clip. Thanks very much.